All right. Hey, everyone. Hey, y'all. Thank you again for coming out to watch this film, Support the Girls. I have lots of thoughts, but I'm really more interested in the thoughts of our panelists that are assembled today. So we'll get into that in just a moment. One of the things that I usually do as we have our panel, and I did a brief introduction before, is for our panelists to sort of reintroduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. And so we can start right here. Would that be okay, Rebecca? We'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Stone. I'm a local Brookliner for a long time. I'm a member of town meeting. I've been involved in local politics, and professionally, I'm in the not-for-profit world, working on various issues having to do with social justice, women, children, families, and gender equity and racial equity.
All right, please welcome Rebecca. Deborah.
And my name is Deborah Brown. I've lived in Brookline for almost 20 years. My background, I'm an environmental attorney, work for EPA. Area of specialization has been hazardous waste, lots and lots of environmental justice work, and have spent a fair amount of time on social justice issues. Most recently, I ran for Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. And I will just say that our work in correcting the deficiencies in Brookline Housing Authority has only just begun. And I would ask everybody here to think about the most neediest people in town and how you can help. Thank you.
All right. Natalie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Sanchez. You may know me. I was one of the organizers for the Boston Women's March in 2017. Currently, thank you, I'm the board president for the organization that formed after that called March Forward Massachusetts. Yeah, there's a lot more to say, but I'm just very excited to be here.
My name is Amy Wicks. I am a digital marketing manager at Massachusetts General Hospital. I work there with the OBGYN department and the psychiatry department. But another part of my job there that's more relevant to this discussion, I host an in-house podcast that we have called Charged, which features the stories of women in medicine.
All right, Amy. All right, esteemed panel. One of the things I like to start with any film is just getting your initial reactions. And anyone can start here. If there was something that resonated for you, something that you had a question that brought up a question when you watched this film, or a theme that really came out of it for you as you watched this. If anybody would like to start.
So this is the second time I've seen the film. When Raul asked me to do this, I figured I should probably watch it to begin with. And I was looking to see whether my initial reactions were reconfirmed, and I saw a few things this time through that I hadn't seen last time, but overall, I had this overwhelming sense that I was watching a film that was very sympathetic to women, but not particularly empathetic. And I wondered whether it would be a different film entirely had it been written and directed and produced by a woman, or by a series of women. And in particular, I thought it sort of accepted as its background the structural inequities that put women in the situations that we see them in this movie, that allow places like whatever they call it in this movie, the sort of tips for tits places like Hooters, to exist without question. The movie doesn't question the underlying structure. It just kind of looks at the women in an admiring way because of how exhausting their lives are and how wonderful it is that they all support each other, but it doesn't question so much, for me, the reasons that all of that exists, why it's so exhausting, whether or not that there is any justice in the fact that they have to be there for each other. So that was my takeaway.
And having lived in Texas, there was an air of familiarity about that movie that I won't go into. I mean, it's sad and just burdened that movie portrayed those women as. I had to, I swore never to wait tables after I worked at the Baker Motel, but I can tell you that existence is real. And that for many people in Texas, there isn't an opportunity out. So when I talk, when I think about the movie, I just thought about, well, dang, this hits close to home. And, good that people get to see it. So that was my take.
So this wasn't planned, but we're both from Texas. And yeah, absolutely. This is, I actually think a couple different things. One, I'm definitely smirking and laughing because it's so realistic. There's establishments, just like that today. But I actually think the producers actually did something pretty ingenious, even though they weren't explicit in talking about the structural issues behind it and what causes establishments like this to exist, and more importantly, the cultures, because it's not really just the establishments, it's the culture about what is accepted, what sells, etc. I think they actually did it pretty cleverly to bring that out. So you see that by them, showing the exhausted look, by showing the fed up look on the women, and also just showing kind of what they put up with. So in a way, I think they actually speak a little bit to that without going very directly. But definitely very realistic. I definitely laughed a lot of the time as well, just because it's so ridiculous, but it's also just so real. I mean, you can also see a lot of the same issues that you saw, a lot of the same reactions, behaviors across industries. It doesn't have to be that blatant and that obvious, the way it was in this movie and the way it is in these kind of establishments, but the exact kind of behavior mentality is still there. And I think anybody who is both a woman of color, or a person of color, or in any kind of minority at all, sexual orientation, you're going to understand what that feels like because you feel it in your everyday life. So I think it was actually quite clever.
I think I appreciated the ending in particular. I think, and the thing that stuck out to me throughout the movie was the importance and the power of having women around you, if you are in this situation, who, can reflect back to you the quality and the value of the person that you are. Even when you're at your lowest low, if it's just like, let's stand on the side of this building and scream, because that's all we can do, but we're standing here together. I really appreciated that.
Sort of one of the, I took some notes while I was watching, especially toward the end, and sort of wrote down sort of the words, the commodification of women is something we see here, and women as assets as well. And the other thing is that the needs and wants of men seem to be driving a lot of what's happening here. This last piece, Amy, that you brought up is women working together and supporting one another. I want to talk about sort of what men can and should be doing as well, but let's talk a little bit more about this too, and how these women sort of stand up for one another and sort of move on from this one place and resist what's happening there. I think, even though they end up at a very similar place, which maybe speaks to the kinds of options that at least this particular group of women have. If any of you can reflect on any piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's something I've seen with the podcast. We interview women who work in medicine, so they have these high-powered careers, but even there, I've heard so many stories of I am where I am because there was a woman next to me who said, why don't you apply for that job? Or why don't you step into that role? Or you'd be really good at this. And even people who I look at and think, wow, you were running a department or literally running a hospital and still had that feeling of can I do that? We need people around us who can remind us of our importance and our value.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. I mean, one of the things it's not just about the camaraderie, which I think is important. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of braveness to actually be able to find different clever ways to stand up for each other, for yourself in kind of situations like this. And again, this is just a very kind of funny depiction of it and kind of very raw and out there, but this is happening every single day in many different facets. So I think being optimistic, but also being super clever about how you can show your support from one another, right? So if we just picked out any of these kind of actions in the film, you wouldn't really think oh, that's a really supportive feminist action to do, but there's many different ways to communicate and get people to build up their pride. But I think the other big thing is meeting people where they're at and realizing that you can't just step in and judge people and say, you're at that establishment, why are you there? You have to meet them where they're at and help them feel courageous, help them feel confident in where they're at. So I think that's actually pretty cool.
Something Natalie said when we first started was, that the movie sort of was an example or a depiction of one sector of the economy. And I'll personalize it. I've worked in a variety of places, and I don't think I've ever worked in an environment where I wasn't flat out discriminated against. Sometimes subtly, and a lot of times not subtly. I mean, like in your face, like, you know what? Just like the boss was saying, the white guy was saying to his direct reports, the women in particular, and the other white guy is trying to tell the new black manager how she should be performing. I've had that happen so many times, and I sit there and I go, dude, I was in this job before you were. And I would ask, how many women in this audience have actually had to train a guy who in turn ended up making more money and maybe didn't even, after the training, have the requisite skills for the job? So, it's painful, but there's a lot of value in sort of having that support system so that it doesn't become too much of a burden.
And feel free at any point to jump in with any, this is our and / your and also your conversation. So we'll be coming to you very soon. So start thinking about what questions and thoughts that you have that you'd like to share. One of the other things I was thinking about too as I was preparing for this was you talked about, Rebecca, the idea that the structures aren't really addressed here, and that they are in many ways ignored, but also for some of us, I think, forgotten. Yeah, the idea, for instance, that we live in a country that is majority women, that 51% of the people in the U.S. Are women, and when we look at our political structures,
that would be a world that's majority women.
A world, absolutely, yes. Thank you. I'll accept the amendment. And so, but I was thinking, because the way I was thinking about this was I was looking up sort of our political structures in this particular country, and that out of the 12,000 or so people that have served in Congress, only 358 in our entire history have been women, and 127 of them are serving right now. That there are currently just 9 women governors, that out of our state legislatures around the country, only 29% are women. Only 21% of mayors of cities over 30,000 are women. And as you probably know, there have only been 4 women Supreme Court justices, and 3 of them are currently serving right now. So I mean, these numbers, if you were to go back even just a decade or so, would be much, much worse than what I'm reading right here. Again, in a country where women are in the majority. So thinking about, and we have 2 at least women on the panel that have run for office before, and thinking about the idea of political power and maybe how we've, fallen into, for some of us anyway, this slumber of not recognizing that in a majority women country, we have men that are deciding everything that's happening. I'm sure it's not lost on you, but.
Yeah, some of us haven't forgotten that. This is a whole different conversation, but it speaks to something Raul's been wonderful about in Brookline, which is talking about how representation matters. And the kinds of things that happen in political and public life and policy especially are different when you have representation of women that's equal to or even close to equal to the population that we serve. I'm currently a town meeting member, and I'm bringing a warrant article before town meeting next week, which would make Brookline the first town in the United States, first municipality in the United States to offer free tampons and pads in its public buildings. I think it's safe to say that no male town meeting member would ever have brought that particular warrant article. And of course, it was based off of an article that was written by a young woman at Brookline High School, And this is happening around the country and around the world, mostly as a result of women standing up and calling bullshit on the whole treatment of periods and menstruation and having it be an other silent thing that happens to 52% of the population for 40 years of their existence. So yeah, this issue of representation and what changes when you have representation, I think in the movie it was reflected in, and we were just talking about earlier, there have to be women in management positions to help other women up. There have to be women on boards and commissions to recruit other women in. There have to be people of color on those boards and commissions and in public life to recruit other people in and to show that it is possible for them to survive in those positions. Because that's the other thing that happens, is that people go into situations where they are not well supported, where there aren't other people who look like them or act like them or are the same gender expression that they are, and they don't do well and they don't survive because they don't have that kind of support that is shown in this movie. So that's why representation matters in a nutshell to me.
And I think that there isn't the representation, at least on the political front, because this society relies on haves and have-nots. This society doesn't exist well if, women of color are making more than 50% of what a white man makes. I mean, that's the model that we have. This system doesn't work, or that's the attitude. And when I say system, I mean that it's not just white men that buy into this. It's everybody that feels like they have to invest in the process or the structure in order for them to get, their salary, to have their home. And so as long as we buy into this, as long as we don't open our eyes to the idea that there are people that are hurting in this society so that we can have scooters on the street. As long as we don't buy into the fact that the next time you go to a board meeting and you don't see any people of color and you don't ask, where are the people of color? You don't ask, where are the women? You don't ask other women, where are the women? You don't ask other women, where are the women? You don't ask men. And very quickly, if we are going to have to stop relying on the way things are if we want something other than women standing on the top of a building screaming at the top of their lungs.
Thanks. So just so you know, I do want to do that, so let's not take that away completely. I have a lot to scream about. Yeah, Amy and I at least probably will go on the top of this building if we can. I hope security's not in here. But there's a couple things. So the other part of my life, I work for an organization called Amplify Latinx, and they are a convening organization of all the Latinx, which is kind of the gender-neutral term for Latino or Latina, serving organizations, community organizations, but also private sector, kind of capital investment firms, basically to get them all together and talk about the shared interests that we have in civic engagement, political participation, and expanding leadership, specifically here in Boston and in greater Massachusetts. So we do a lot of convening, right? We get a lot of people together to figure out how to get into the boardroom, how to get into the C-suite, all of those kind of things, but definitely political office. Mixing the two of that world and the world of the Women's March, and I take that, I actually am on the board for the National Women's March called March On, not Women's March Inc. So I get to talk with dozens and dozens of organizers, both new and old, that have been part of this fight for a long time. So I've seen a lot of different angles, and my background is policy and international development. So I went to the Kennedy School. So a lot of different lenses here that I'm coming to you. And why this is important is because at every single one of those facets and aspects of my life, the same thing is true. Representation matters. But the other thing is true, and it's a very easy thing to say, don't be complacent. But what does that mean? It means, yes, asking the question where people are, but it also means being willing to give up some of that comfort that you have. And there has to be a true acknowledgement of why certain groups and people are more advanced and have a better leg up in the world. And it does go down to our history, right? We need to really acknowledge that, and we need to really reteach history. A lot of what we're taught through high school, even through college, everything about history is essentially Victor's perspective, right? If any of you have read Howard Zinn, you know that kind of concept well. But history is always told by the victor. And the reality is this country, it has a wonderful kind of culture that people buy into, which is you can come here, you can make anything of yourself. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I hope everyone in this audience knows that that's just not true. There's nobody here that does it alone. There's no one here that, no matter how smart you are, even if you come from a well-educated, well-financed family, you still didn't do it alone, because the systems and the structures that were built off of slavery and oppression are the structures that allowed you to have that leg up. So I think there has to be a re-education, and you see that happening in a lot of different ways. But anytime you walk into a space, you need to double think your history, rethink about, why is this organization the way it is? Why is this business in place the way it is? And really start to ask those questions. And it's not like you're going to walk in and ask your boss those questions, right? But have the conversations with someone else. Start to do some reading if you don't know about some of the things I'm referencing. And more than anything, I would say reach out, and just because, and just actually, I think, Deborah, you said it, there's always another woman to pull someone up, but also women like to keep women down too. So I will tell you, all of my mentors in life have been men. So I think we have to break the gender gap there and say that people as people should be pulling each other up. So if you're a man, if you're a woman, you should be pulling those that aren't represented up. Whatever that is for your particular industry, your particular job, it could be very simple, but find the person that you can pull up, and also recognize that by how you pull them up or how you think you're pulling them up could also be a source of control and power, right? So don't act like you're giving them the greatest gift by letting them in the room. Sometimes they deserve to be in the room more than you, so maybe you pulling them up is you taking a step back.
The thing I would add, as I've been listening to what everyone else was saying, is I think it's important too for us collectively to take a step back and look at the way systems and processes are built. And I think this goes to the question of, what role do men play and how can they be a part of this? In the world that I'm in academic medicine, women and men are going to med school at the same rates these days. They're graduating at the same rates. They're beginning their careers in medicine at the same rates, which is amazing. But then what happens is you look further and further up the ladder, and it starts to shift, and you see fewer and fewer women. And part of the reason for that is that, as a young clinician, as a young researcher, at the point when your career is really taking off is also the point when often you want to get married and you want to start a family, which means, you're going to need to take maternity leave. And then, you're going to need to do something really simple like pump so you can feed your baby. And if your workplace and the system that you're a part of isn't built to accommodate that, then what happens too often is women, rather than fighting back, might just say, you know what, I'm just going to take a step back, or I'm going to take some time off. And we all know, what that leads to down the line. So collectively looking at the way these things are built and saying, this is the way we've always done it, but it doesn't mean that that's what we have to keep doing if what we really want is, parity down the line.
So I'm gonna do one more question, then we'll come to you. So start thinking about that, and we'll have a mic come out to you. One of the things I was thinking about here is then what are some of our what should some of our policy solutions be to the gender inequities that we see right now? Certainly, we hear a lot about the need to lean in and then negotiate for salary and stuff like that, but those don't address structural issues at all. What are some of the policies in your minds you think that we should be pushing forward? For instance, we passed universal child care in the 70s, and it was vetoed by President Nixon, right? And so is that something that we should be bringing back right now? And are there other policies that would actually remove barriers? Because that's what it seems to be, remove barriers for women to participate fully in our society.
ERA, sorry. So for those who don't know it, the Equal Rights Amendment still has not passed. And this year alone, and from last year to this year, there's been a few states that have come very close to ratifying that. If a few more states are able to do that, then across the country that has to go into effect. Some basic things that take away from that: actual equal pay across the board, required, paid family leave. And I know Massachusetts thinks it's ahead on a lot of these things. We really are not. And I come from Texas, which is at the whole other end of backwards and behind. But I can tell you Massachusetts is very quickly losing its grip on the lead in a lot of these things. Very timely right now with abortion and what's going on in Alabama and a lot of other states. I mean, these are the things that everyone, male or female, should be paying attention to, because if a female is not able to make the choices they need to be successful, to continue to take the jobs, to continue to stay in them, it affects the whole family. And realistically, as the women's population continues to grow and minorities continue to grow, if you have those people continuing to be on a decline, which we are in terms of output and opportunity, the entire system is going to eventually crash. So if you're not a feminist, you are now dubbed a feminist by being part of this. Definitely look up what that really means, but I'll say those are definitely 3 policies right now that we need to pay attention to. And I can tell you in Massachusetts, we have not accomplished any of those.
I think we have to address the issue of debt.
Oh, yes.
You can't get anywhere if you're just bogged down in debt. And it's student debt, it's the payday loans. Those are designed in a very real way to keep people down. I think that the whole educational structure from pre-K, we need universal pre-K. We need universal pre-K. We need to level sort of the whole educational structure in terms of what we ask of our children. I mean, it makes no sense for, by the time a young black boy gets to be in 3rd grade, that there's a significant number that are already turned off from school. And if you compare that to, I saw some numbers that said that the white population in Massachusetts declined by 3% over the last 10 years. But for Asians and Latinos, it increased 56%, and for African Americans, it increased 33%. You got to take into account also, in addition to education, debt, but that the demographics are changing such that if you don't rethink how you begin to create access points for people into institutions that don't look exactly like you, then a lot of one of my most cynical responses about immigration reform is, who the hell do you think is going to be paying into Social Security? And if that person isn't well educated and well employed, guess what? I hear cat food isn't all that bad. So we have a vested interest in it.
Deborah.
Pardon me?
Cat food's very pricey in Massachusetts.
Oh, it is. So that's my take on it. The numbers are telling a story that makes this essential.
Yeah, I mean, I think very basically that when you talk about policies having to do with women, you have to go straight to the economy of being female. I mean, yes, it's about debt. Yes, it's about all of these things that you've mentioned. But the control of the female body and the assumption that women are responsible for children are the 2 biggest drivers of why women are not economically secure. And the fact that women are responsible for children, but the society is not set up to support that, not set up to support parenting, not set up to support education, not set up to support childcare in any way, certainly not set up to support women working and earning a living while they are also doing this free childcare that the society benefits from. It all gets down to the economics of being female, and it's fundamentally about the control of the female body and the assumption that we will produce the future generations and take care of them for free.
Sorry, Raul, can I add one more thing? So two basics, and I think for folks that are in this room, you probably heard a lot of these kind of topics before. From a policy perspective, housing. I mean, Deborah can speak forever, so if you don't know Deborah and you don't know about, I'll call it the housing crisis in Brookline, there is one. There's a lot of issues in Brookline, and Deborah can fill you in after this chat extensively about that. But just to make this a little personal and to make it clear from a policy perspective, having an actual place to stay, and I don't mean owning a home, because for a lot of people that will never happen, and that doesn't necessarily equal an asset. And it's a dream that has been sold to a lot of people, and that has forced people to try to acquire a home and then go into debt because they have no financial management, because they don't have steady income, because all of the different things we've talked about. Having a place to live, whether or not that shifts over time, whether or not that rents, and having access to food. And I know this sounds basic, and we think we've solved a lot of this in Massachusetts. I can point you to dozens and dozens of families right now that are hungry, kids that are going to school, maybe not going to school, that go to school hungry, that don't have a steady place to live.
In Brookline.
In Brookline. And it's growing. It's getting worse and worse. And as a society, we take pride in the things we do well, as we should. But in doing so, we kind of forget to look at the reality and the truth. When we talk about the changing demographics and the numbers, a lot of these issues are still escalating. But in Massachusetts, the Latino population and across the country, we are the main reason why there is a population growth. If we were not doing what we're doing, sorry, sounds a little vulgar, there would be a population decline at this point. So when you think about the continuation, you've got to think about those factors. But there's a food crisis, and it's not because of lack of food, it's because of how things are structured. And there's lack of access to housing. And I mentioned this as personal. I grew up extremely poor. To be able to get a job like that would have been amazing to actually have a job that provided food and a place that I knew and that I could go to get food. That is still the case in Texas. That is still the case in Dorchester. That's still the case in Brookline. So start basic. You don't have access to food. You don't have access to secure housing. Nothing else gets you there. For me, education was my outlet. It was the place that I knew I could get a free lunch. It was a place that I knew nobody could tell me about or understand all of the other stuff that was going on or know how much drama was going on, because I could just be a student. Now, I could get ridiculed all day long because I wore the same thing over and over again, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that is still a lot of people's realities. Food, access to shelter, and physical safety and emotional safety. I think that will be the other thing from a policy perspective. There's a lot of, whether you put it under domestic violence or whatever, there's a lot of psychological and emotional, physical distress that women especially are under. And we need to take that more seriously. So when you think of all of those policies, they all seem kind of separate. But as you're hearing today, they're all connected. So if you want to know where to start, pick anything. Pick anything and drill into it and put the lens on of a woman. And if you don't have the lens of a woman handy, ask somebody, find someone.
All right, thank you. Let's go to your questions, your thoughts. Only ask that you keep it relatively brief. You're also welcome to sort of provide a thought. I don't require questions. We shouldn't. If you have something that you'd like to reflect on and have the panel respond to, we can do that too. And it's on you. And Mark's out here with the microphone.
Hi, I'm Tamara Sobel from Media Literacy Now and from the Girls, Women, and Media Project. And this is an amazing panel. It's sort of different subject-wise than I thought, but it's been really interesting. These really big issues that you're all talking about, I think, are very relevant, sort of coming from this film and leading to them. I think it's wonderful. I kind of want to circle back to some issues that I focus on after seeing this film in terms of the issues of women's bodies, body image, objectification, self-objectification. Is that any better than objectification? Is the solution objectifying men and seeing how they like it? I like the, what was the name of the, she alludes to them going to a
Nut huggers.
Nut huggers. That's hilarious. They just got that in there. So this is not really a question, it's more of a comment. We don't have any space, I believe, for girls and women to talk about these things. I work currently with the Department of Education in Massachusetts trying to make sure body image, sexuality, self-image, as the media preaches to us or teaches us sort of very subconsciously about how we see ourselves as objects, how the focus is our bodies 24/7. So I think, just a comment, I think that we also, besides all these other incredibly key issues that we've just been talking about, I think we also have to make a space for more talk about how we see our bodies, the objectification that is so inherent in our everyday world from the media. The amount of media we see has grown hugely from the past 10, 20 years even. And young women and girls are not getting the space to talk about how the media influences them, the culture influences their thoughts about their own bodies. There's an amazing project in Brookline called Media Girls that maybe some of you know about. But I think the future, as part of the great movement that's happening now, is also to be thinking a lot about what we're seeing in the media, in the culture, about how we see our bodies, how we prioritize that they have to look this way all the time, and that we're valued by our boobs and our butts, like is part of this movie. You know, the commodities. Well, we're moving from boobs to butts, you know, like it's no big deal. Like blue sweater, red sweater, no biggie, you know. So I think that talk about bodies has got to be part of our progress forward. That's just a comment.
You know, I agree, and I was I've been reading this book, and I think as you're thinking about it through the lens of the Department of Education, I would ask that you actually think about it also through the lens of different subcultures. And different subcultures see bodies very differently.
Another question right up here.
Hi, my name is Eileen, and I used to be a manager at a clinic that was in Brookline, Repro Associates, right up on Beacon Street. And in my role as a manager, a middle manager, as was Regina's, I always found that I was protecting everyone who worked for me from the miseries of management, and how management never understood what life was like for the workers. I did, but yet to keep my job, I had to satisfy both managers, but yet keep this protective kind of motherly thing going on for everyone who ever reported to me. And finally, towards the end of my career, I was able to become an individual contributor as opposed to a manager. What a relief, because all I had to worry about was fighting my own battles with management. I didn't have to protect the workers from the vagaries of bad management, which I found every place I ever worked at. So I really sympathized with her for her struggles, and I understood what she was going through. And that's why I thought Support the Girls, the concept, and her dilemmas were very well portrayed as far as the role when you're not when you're not an owner and you're not a worker and you're kind of in between. So that was my take on it.
Well, for the public, so folks can hear you.
Thanks. Okay, hi. So this is my third time seeing this film, and I was very curious. Every time I see it, I notice something different, like you guys were saying. But I think the biggest thing for me, especially as someone in their early 20s, was I've seen way too many films about women in the workplace being like pitted against each other, and how that is like the main plot device. And when I first saw it last year when it came out, I honestly thought that's where it was going from the beginning, you know, all the 5 women coming in for the interview. So what do you guys think is the main takeaway for young women, you know, adolescents or people in their 20s like me, to finally see something on screen that is very supportive? And I do agree that it can, you know, it can go farther. This was directed by a man, but at the same time, the focus being that women can support each other at any level rather than it just kind of be like one-upping each other. And that's like, again, just like every time I see this, I'm like, finally, you know? So I was just kind of curious as to what your takeaway was.
I want to know what movies you've been going to, because I maybe it's my own choices, but I feel like the movies that I've seen, I don't know, recently, there are lots of movies where women are actively supporting each other in difficult situations. I mean, Thelma and Louise ends tragically, but you know, so but it's. But I think of movies increasingly. The recent series about the women. No, not Marv. It's not in superheroes. It's a recent series with Reese Witherspoon and Big Little Lies, where you have lots of different women in very different circumstances, and all what happens is they come together to support each other, even though they are originally pitted against each other. So, what have you been seeing?
I think one thing for me that I take away from it too is the importance of, I think it is a change, and it's women supporting each other on two different levels. There's sort of the peers, we're in the same position, and we can push each other up together, but also that sort of mentorship level, if they have this woman over them who, she has this sort of motherly role, but she also is there to be a model and to encourage them. And so it's valuable to have those relationships on two different levels.
Hi. One thing that I personally liked about the movie was the placement of people of color in the movie, that they gave a leadership to a woman of color. Yet she was surrounded also by other women who are of different races, and that is unusual in the movies that we've seen in the past. I feel as if the movie was just a snapshot in reality, like if you just went visiting this place and you saw these things and you left, and everyone is going to see it with a different eye, depending on, what they know about society or experiences they've had in their lives. Whether they see what Natalie was talking about in terms of the system and how it treated these people to get to a certain place in their lives. Some of the things that came up in terms of how there was some mention on how women who were pretty had a lesser brain. And that's something that comes in multiple cultures, and in multiple religions where women are treated as lesser or weaker or don't have enough of a brain capacity. What I would like to ask of the panel is, where have you seen intersectionality in the movie and also in the work that you do in your daily life?
I'm going to give an MGH example. Actually, you know what? It cuts both ways. I've got two examples. So one example is my best friend, Gordia Bannister.
Who was a guest on the podcast.
To know her is to love her. But Gordia is like, I don't even know all that she does, but it's like every time I talk to her, I find out she has another responsibility. And she's an African-American woman who grew up in Wyoming, and she brings a perspective and a way that sort of brings people to the table, but she's also very demanding. And she's demanding in a way that I've observed how she elevates people's level of work and contribution, but also makes very clear that she is an African-American woman, and that she is conscious of the fact that African-American Latino women are severely underrepresented in healthcare. And so, it's like, I have enjoyed seeing that. But if I think about my own career as an environmental attorney, it's gotten a little better. And I'll tell you, when I first went, I would go to negotiations, and people would sit there, and they'd be sitting there like, is the attorney going to show up? And then the staff attorney would show up, and at that point I was a supervising attorney, and I'd just sit in the room because I just wanted to see how things were going. And then maybe I'd say, oh, I don't know about this. I don't like the way this is going. And I would speak up, and I'd say, I don't know. And mostly men, almost exclusively white men, would sit there, and there would be this cognitive dissonance of, oh my goodness, is she the person that I have to convince that this is a good deal? And it got a little better, but I think depending on how entrenched the sector is, and I think the legal community is very entrenched with this model. If you look at the senior level people in law firms, it's probably still 95, 98% white men. And so I think part of the trick is how do we, sort of build on, say, what an MGH model is, which comes from the top, Brother Slavin. When people say to him, I'm not comfortable in this organization, he takes it in. But I dare say if you go to a law firm and you say, I'm not comfortable in this organization, they may just tell you, oh, you don't have enough billable hours, why don't you find somewhere else to go? So, I mean, that's what I've seen.
I think too, it's important to think of it on an individual level. I've had a lot of conversations, similar conversations. One of the top surgeons at the hospital is a refugee from Nicaragua, came here as a child, has this incredible story, and is now a gynecologic oncologist, and literally saving women's lives. But she had a story where she came into the hospital room to talk to a patient before surgery, and the husband said, "Can you come back and clean the room later?" And we all have these ideas of a surgeon looks like this, or a lawyer looks like that, or a teacher looks like this, or a nurse looks like that. And so checking yourself, and what do I expect this person to be, or what's the gender pronoun that I'm just falling on without thinking about it, and taking a step back and realizing that that is part of we are formed in this way that we see the world, and we need to kind of turn it upside down.
And I'll just add one thing on intersectionality. I think there's two questions, one in the back and then one up here. But just really quickly, can I get a show of hands? If you're identified as a woman, can you raise your hand? If you identify as a man, raise your hand. I'm not going to say gender affiliation one way or the other. Everybody has multiple aspects of them, meaning this concept of intersectionality is not just for the brown people, it's not just for the black people. Every single person is intersectional. What that means is you have different aspects of yourself. And I will say this too, and this will definitely sound controversial. There are a lot of white people that fall at those intersections as well and are discriminated against. The whole concept is not that you'd have different aspects, but that those different pieces of you, the different definitions or categorizations of yourself that you live every single day are discriminating against you, are holding you down because of the systems and the structures in which we live. I say white because thinking of Texas and extremely poor white, you start to get into a whole nother level of intersectionality that isn't really seen up here, but I do want to acknowledge that, but also point out intersectionality is something that every single one of you is grappling with, whether or not you recognize it or not. I'll say if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, regardless of person of color, it's just more exacerbated. You face those intersectionality issues every single day. So if you want to know more about that, definitely let me know.
We've got time for one more question before a final round from the panel. Hello.
Thanks. Hello. This has been great. I'm sorry that I can tell you can't see me. But I am in my early 30s, and I feel like I have, a lot of energy. And I watch our protagonist in this film have a lot of energy to fulfill all the roles that she has. And then looking to her partner and saying, you can't not try. And then looking at her boss, doing her boss's job, and seeing him be the owner, but do nothing. He barely fixes the cable. And so I don't want to sound naive, but I have a very earnest question, which is how do we find and maintain the energy to continue to support each other? Like I said, I'm in my early 30s, and I am looking up here at this panel and seeing a lot of inspiration, but just wondering from your experience, that encouragement.
I'm going to give a really jaded answer. I've had 2 heart attacks. Everybody's got something. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons I had those heart attacks is because I didn't have a system. I didn't have systems in place that allowed me not to take in all of the crap that was coming at me so much of the time. So, one, it's really important to do. Obviously, I figured that out. MGH heart health program. But the other piece of it is that once I figured out that, there's this concept called loving kindness. Anybody ever heard of loving kindness? Yeah. It's this idea that when stuff gets tough, you come up with your mantra, you come up with that place that centers you. And it's a journey, it's a process to get there. And once you get there, it's like a sweet spot. And so no matter what goes on any given day, you try to loop yourself back around to that sweet spot. And once you get there, practice a little gratitude. Just before I go to bed at night, I'm good for 2 or 3 gratitudes, no matter what. And that's what I've found that's been very helpful to me. I also have an incredibly wonderful support system. I can honestly say that I am well loved. So that's important too. And try not to bring all of that mishmash home.
I think one thing I've learned is, pick your battles. I think especially in the world we live in right now, it's like every day there's some huge thing that makes you feel like shit. And you can't take it all on. And to find a place where, for me, talking about gender, it's like women, there are a lot of problems facing us, and I can't change a lot of them. But the one thing I'm doing is, having this podcast and having conversations with women that I do think are meaningful. And that's my little contribution, because I can't take it all on at every moment, and giving yourself the space and making it okay to step away. And I'm going to tap out. I'm going to take care of myself for a little while so then I can jump back in later and I can take it on.
I'll say, just to close out, be very picky with who you surround yourself with, and learn when it's time to let go of people or put them in a further space where they're just not getting a lot of your energy, where you're decreasing the amount of time. I think that's uber critical. Everything kind of comes down to your mind, right? What your heart, I think they're completely interconnected. I don't think one is independent of the other. So, but how much time and energy you put in with your mind, with your heart towards people, there is a return. Maybe you can't see it, but you'll feel it. Your body will tell you when you're exhausted. In the Women's March, kind of everything that's happened since then, and all of the work that we've been doing across many facets and the work that I do now, it's exhausting. You're tired. You need to one, figure out who you're around and make sure that you have people that are just there to give you energy, and that's okay. Maybe they have nothing to do with the work that you're doing. They have nothing to do with the field. Maybe they're childhood friends, a random person at work that really doesn't know all the other crazy stuff you're doing outside of work. Just somebody that is that pump you up kind of person. It's okay, and it's great to have those, and it's great to be that for somebody. You have to figure out where your energy drives from. So I'm that person that I love to cheerlead for other people, right? That gives me energy. But then I can go home and crash and be exhausted, and then I need that fix from somebody else. So I'll say that. And the other big piece that I think we don't talk about, and I learned coming here really through education, and it's a privilege, is understanding what you put into your body, understanding how to take care of your body physically, and that is different for everybody, but you've got to prioritize that balance of what exercise and nutrition looks like to you, because you can go a million miles per hour, but your body does have very basic requirements. So pay attention to that. Even if you've gone, and I'm a horrible example at it because I go crazy with the caffeine and just forget to eat real food every once in a while. But you got to have that balance. So think about everything holistically: the people you surround you with, the food, the exercise, all of it. And you can't be tired, because I'm in my mid-30s, and yeah, we don't have time to be tired. If we're tired, somebody else falls behind. So get up.
So all of this is great advice, and I've never been able to take any of it. So it's all true. I would just say a couple of things. I would say burn Sheryl Sandberg's book, and feel good about that. Find yourself a rooftop where you can go scream, because you're going to need to. No matter how much taking care of yourself you do, you will find yourself in positions of incandescent rage. All you have to do is watch the news. All I could think of with that final scene was of screaming on the roof was how I felt watching the Kavanaugh hearings. Incandescent rage is part of being female in this world right now, and particularly in this country. And so, yes, take care of yourself, but take deep breaths. And if you have the energy, just keep going. Just keep doing. I mean, I think it's all great, but if you have the energy and if you have the instinct to throw yourself into things as opposed to the right advice, which is to learn how to say no and limit what you do. I'm really bad at that. I've spent my life seeing problems and saying, maybe there's something I can do about this. And if somebody turned to me and said, well, you could do this, I would do it. And I don't regret any of those decisions, even though it is exhausting. And it's hard, but you do end up, I think, surrounding yourself and being surrounded by people like that. And that's a great thing and a rewarding thing. So go to it.
So one final just question for you. One of the things that we often get, people tell me all the time, like, that was amazing. What should I do next? So if you'd like to share either an action that people can take, something that they should read, watch, or listen to become even more informed on these issues, or something you'd like to see us do more of going forward, and anyone can start.
I think get involved. If there's something that bothers you, that you care about, that is really that thing that's keeping you up at night, find something you can do. Find people that you can volunteer with, that you can be a part of, because it will bring those like-minded people into your life. Probably a lot of people here know Raul just ran for office, and a lot of us were part of that campaign, and it was exciting to see getting involved, that we could have an impact. And at the end, I think we all came away super energized, and I know it left me thinking, like, okay, what's next? Who else needs help? And so, as tiring as it was also energizing, and it gave me a lot of hope for where we could be if we all can do that again and again.
And he won, if you guys didn't know. He won. What's your homework? I love cliches, but I'll try not to go with one. Figure out, so it's a 2-part assignment. Figure out what you can get rid of, and I mean physically, what you can get rid of in your home that you no longer need, that's no longer valued, that you're not you're not grateful for. And the second part is find a home for it from someone who really values it, who really needs it. And the second part, that was all the first part. And I do think decluttering your space, and it gives you a couple different opportunities to take inventory on what you have and what you've been blessed to have and to acquire. But it also forces you then to figure out, who really needs this more than me. And this could be an article of clothing, it could be a piece of furniture. I don't know if Brookline does it, but there's a ton of those kind of free websites to just trade things. But even if it's not, go to a women's shelter, go to low-income housing, talk to the management, find out what people need. The other piece is put your time out there for someone. So yes, volunteering is great. There's a lot of great organizations, but I mean, actually find a person that needs a mentor. And if that seems exhausting and too big, make it small. Say, I'm willing to mentor you for 3 months, or I'm willing to help you accomplish X goal. Find somebody who needs that. And every single person in here, regardless of age and where you're at in your career, you have the ability to mentor. The fact that you're in this room, you're able to come to the showing, we are privileged, which means you have something to give back, and you owe it to other people. So I would say do those 2 things.
I have a vision board. I know that sounds really hokey. I have 3 things on it. One of them is like, I would really like to learn ballroom dancing. So that's on the list.
Did you know that I know?
Oh, I did not know that you know.
Competitive ballroom dancer.
God, all right. That may be, I may be working on that one. And the other thing is it started out being very generic. It was, work on a social justice issue near and dear to me. And it went from that to working on the lack of adequate housing here in Brookline. And try to be as specific as you can be. And then finally, the last thing I have in there is live and love. And that may sound totally hokey. But I put it in a place so that I see it every day. And I did that so that I don't lose sight of it. So it never becomes sort of like, that's out there. But that it's a constant reminder to me that I have this work to do. I also have a website if you want to, Deborah Brown for Brookline, if you want to, get involved with housing issues. I also am a leader in a people of color group here in Brookline, so that we actually have a space to talk about issues. And I'm also involved in the Coalition to Eliminate Racism in Brookline. So I know I'm busy, but just drop a line and we'll get you hooked up. And and you know what? It can be fun. This work can be fun. So hope to see some of you guys.
So my favorite sign at the Women's March, the first Women's March, and it's been at subsequent ones, is I can't believe I still have to protest this shit. And having been in the world and in this business for a long time, some of what I'm experiencing these days around issues of feminism and issues of representation, the abortion fight, everything else, is I can't believe we're still doing this. I can't believe we're doing it again. And so I would recommend that if you all have a chance, you go to a book by Susan Faludi called Backlash, because I believe that what we are experiencing today is exactly what we were experiencing then when she wrote it, which was the early 1990s, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a brilliantly done book about what happens when women make progress in society and what that backlash consists of, what it looks like, what it feels like. We are going through a period of backlash right now, and so pull out Susan Faludi's Backlash and see that this is a cycle and that what you can do and what's happening is all right there before you. We're going to go through the cycle again. It's going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I hope it's not 1 step forward and 2 steps back.
I'll say for myself, thinking back on our campaign for select board, it was completely powered by women. I mean, our entire cabinet, I think with one exception, was all women. It was mostly women that knocked on doors for us. It was mostly women that wrote Dear Friend cards for us. It was mostly women that made phone calls for us. It was mostly women that held up signs at the polls and elsewhere at other events for us. And so sort of reflecting and thinking back on that, I'm redoubling my commitment to supporting women candidates who I believe in, and also to supporting organizations. Some include Emerge as one organization that is supporting women running for office. Another one is Ignite, that is actually working with very young girls and women in terms of getting them to aspire to run for office. And there are many others out there like She Should Run and other organizations that you can find if you're so inclined. And I encourage you to find those organizations, support them, give money to those organizations, but then also, especially for those men in the room, find ways to get involved and support women who are running for office. So with that, before we give one final thank you to our panelists, I do want to also give a thanks to all the folks that work here at the Coolidge, in particular the people who come and do things like film here, the folks who work in technology, the wonderful Mark who's around somewhere, the folks at concessions, and also the folks that'll come up and clean up after us afterwards. And so I always try to remind folks, please bring whatever you brought in here, try to dispose in the trash barrels over there before you go, so that to make their job just that much easier. So thank you all for coming, and one more round of applause, please, for our panelists who are amazing. Thank you so much.